first speaker for today is Mr. Faisal Hashmi, an award-winning UAE-based filmmaker with a number of winning short films and branded content under his belt. His short film, Perfect Living, screened at the Cannes Film Festival Short Film Corner in May 2011 and won Best Film at Season of Film, judged by acclaimed Emirati director Nawaf Al-Janahi. He has also directed a dramatic short film, Bubble, which played at multiple festivals worldwide with acclaim. May I please welcome on stage Mr. Faisal Hashmi.
Thank you all. When I was first asked to come here and speak about something under the theme of media and social responsibility, it sparked a question within me. What is the social responsibility that a filmmaker has? Or does a filmmaker even have a social responsibility? I mean, it's easy to understand why people would expect that from a filmmaker, because we have a platform to tell our stories to a mass audience. So what I'm about to say now is not necessarily relevant only to filmmakers, but to any kind of storyteller, because at the end of the day, we're all just telling stories. You know, I use the medium of film to do so. You could be using a short story, a news outlet, a painting, a photo, a play. So I started thinking about this question, you know, what social responsibility does a filmmaker have? And I realized that it's not something that I've actively thought about a couple of times, I mean, at any point. And I realized that what the social responsibility of a filmmaker is to move the viewer. And now, the word move could be very vague and very broad, but let me specify what I mean. Moving the viewer, in my opinion, would mean taking a person from one state of mind that they were before they were watching your film to a different state of mind that they come into while they're watching your film, or sometimes even after they watched your movie. So if you've made a drama, and if people are watching it, and if they happen to reflect upon something, or they happen to cry, for example, then you've moved the viewer. You know, if it's a comedy and they've laughed during your film, then you've moved the viewer. If it's a horror film, if you've scared them, you've moved the viewer. If it's an action film and you've thrilled them, you've moved the viewer. You know, whether you want to educate or entertain, you can move the viewer through the power of film. And it's the best thing about a film that can happen is the viewer will move. Because the worst thing that can happen is no reaction at all. If someone is indifferent to your film, that's probably the worst thing that can happen to your film, in my opinion. And you know, there are a number of people that look upon certain genres of film like comedies, like, oh, they're lowbrow, you know, stupid comedies, and like they're not art, whatever that the definition of art means. But I don't think so. I think film in general has the power and the potential to have a positive change anyway. Because maybe, for example, someone had a terrible day at work or at home, and he just happens to watch your film, whether it's a 5-minute stupid comedy that you just made something silly, or a 2-hour film. But if you happen to make him laugh, and you happen to make that person forget about his problems for even that small amount of time, I think that's a positive change that you might not have thought about when you were making the movie, but it did happen. You moved the person. And I think, you know, we've all seen throughout our lifetime that what we've done, if we've kind of affirmed our beliefs in certain things, and they become part of our childhood, or they become part of who we are throughout the years. And you know, stories in films have the power to do that, because, and we've been doing this for a long time, because even when we were cavemen, we used to tell stories to each other about great warriors and legends and myths, and it used to motivate people, it used to inspire a lot of people. You know, stories always have the power to do that. Even today, we sit around the campfire, and we always talk about scary stories. And it's always, that tradition still lives on in some way or the other. And film is just one of the mediums that it has moved on to in today's world. You know, I became a filmmaker because I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to tell stories that entertain, but also have an impact on people in any way possible, just to move them in some way. You know, I've made comedy short films, I've made some horror short films, I've made some dramas, but my main idea is to basically tell good stories in any way that I can. And I think it's a great initiative to become a filmmaker for. If that's your passion to become a filmmaker with. A lot of people want to become a filmmaker because they want to change the world. which is a very noble way to think about it, but it's also something that you can't aim for because you don't change the world because you decide to change the world. It's something that could become a consequence of what you do. So your aim should really just be to tell good stories and hope that they have an impact on people. Just tell them in the best way possible. For the next point I want to go on to is a lot of people want to become a filmmaker because they feel they have something to say or they have a statement to make, for example. And they want to make films with some sort of a message. And for people who want to make films with some sort of a message on them, I think the social responsibility of that filmmaker would be to do that message justice. And the way you do that message justice is you make sure that message isn't heavy-handed and you're not preaching. Because it's easy to move into the line of preaching when you're making a short film which you want to send a message across with. If I ask any one of you what your short film is about, and you tell me your short film is about bullying, for example, then that's kind of a problem, because if your film is all about the message in itself, then all you're doing is kind of diluting your message and you can limit your audience. Because if I tell you right now that you guys let's all watch a movie, a 10-minute film about drunk driving, for example, how exciting would that be? It's not something that will excite you. It sounds like extra, just because I just first. So I think it's important to, instead of doing that, you need to make sure that drunk driving isn't a character. It's not a story. It moves within a story. These are not stories. We watch movies for stories. So you present your message across in the best possible manner. I think it's important to make sure that you're telling your message through great characters and through a great story that people can relate to. And the message just organically comes out of that. A lot of you guys know Vimeo, the video sharing website. And if you go to Vimeo.com and if you search for The Beard, you will find in the first couple of results this amazing short film which tackles racism as a topic. But the film isn't about racism. It's about an old man walking home at night, and you're looking at him and you basically realize there's something that has happened to him. Something's off at what you're looking at. And that's what drives you towards watching that story. And it's one of the most powerful short films I've seen that tackles the theme of racism. And it's not because it was outright about racism. It was about a character. And so that's my point. You should make a short film, make a film about a story and make your message organically come across with it, and it'll have the most impact. I've been fortunate enough to be working in the UAE film industry for about 3 to 4 years now. And I've been fortunate enough to be telling stories, the stories that I have. And for anyone who wants to become a filmmaker in this region, you have to realize that we have a very good and a very active film movement, a film scene here, but you wouldn't call it an industry yet. And the reason you wouldn't call it industry yet is because we don't have that consistent output so far every year to be called industry. I mean, we've had 3 locally produced films in the last 4 years, which doesn't make an industry, and that's fine because UAE in itself is maybe 40 years old, right, compared to a lot of other countries which produce films. So we're still finding our place our identity in arts. And I think all of us, we are all storytellers of tomorrow. We're students today, but we're all storytellers tomorrow, and I think we are going to be a part of shape that identity. Because we will find stories to tell which are unique to us. And UAE being a country which has such a melting pot of different cultures, it's something that you'll almost never find in any other country. We have different cultures, we have different stories to tell from every part of the culture. So I think it's important if you want to become a filmmaker here to know that it's your responsibility to make sure that the story that you're telling, you be true to it. Because there will be many points throughout the life of your film or of your story that there will be people who will be trying to dilute the message. There will be people who will be trying to censor what you're trying to say. There will be people, if you're looking for funding, for example, there will be people who will be trying to place their own agendas into it. They'll try to place their own things into it that might go against what you intended with the film. And that's important to make sure that you don't lose sight of what your message is. And I don't mean compromise, because compromise is something you'll have to make eventually. I mean, making the most perfect version of your film is going to be the one that's in your head the moment you finish writing the script. Everything after that is basically just a series of small compromises that you have to make, knowing the budgets that we have, knowing that you're an independent filmmaker, you will realize that some of the locations that you thought of, you might not be able to shoot there. Some of the actors that you wanted, you're not going to be able to get them. Some of the shots that you wanted to do, you're not able to get them. But that's okay. That's something that we all have embraced. But it's important to know that the essence of the story that you wanted to tell, that drove you to making that film or that project in the first place, because there have been many points, making a film is hard work. It could take a couple of weeks, it could take a couple of months, it could even take a year, depending on the film you're trying to make. And there will be points in your in that period that you will have self-doubt. There will be points where things are not going the way that you wanted them to be. And in those down moments, the only thing that will be giving you the motivation to go on will be that essence of the story that really drove you into making the project in the first place. So it's important that that is always there, because in periods like that will push on, make you push on and finish your project. So it's important to not lose sight of that in any way. And as a filmmaker, it's also your responsibility to make sure that if you've made a film that you're proud of, then you need to make sure that it gets the audience that it deserves. You need to put your film out there, and for that to happen, one of the things that you should do is you need to put yourself out there. And I know for filmmakers, it's kind of a foreign concept a lot, because and I understand that, because we're all creative people, and it's, a lot of us live in our own world in a way. We're not that extroverted as, a lot of other people are, but it's important that we, for the sake of our films, we need to make sure that we can get them the audience that they deserve to get. I made a conscious choice to be on all social media platforms that I could be, just to have an active presence on them. So whether it's Facebook or it's Twitter or Instagram, wherever people are on. And I think that has helped bring that audience towards the films that I do. That was an active choice I made for the sake of my films, because if I make a good film, I want people to see it. Every film needs an audience. So you need to make sure that if you've made a good film that you're proud of, that give it the audience that it deserves. So at the end of the day, what is the social responsibility of a filmmaker? I think it is to tell a good story, to tell it responsibly, to make sure and do your best to get it the audience that it deserves, and to make sure that you're not just moving a camera, you're moving your audience. Thank you.
The floor is open for any questions.
Hi, Faisal. Thanks for sharing your views. As a filmmaker, you would have come across many such issues. One of the issues which in the recent past has been causing concerns is in terms of the censorship on the movies.
Sure.
Very recently, an Egyptian movie was censored in Egypt. What are your reactions to that? And as a filmmaker, do you think was it an infringement of a freedom of expression of speech, or was the authorities right in their views?
Sure. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, really, because I can completely understand why certain countries would want to have put restrictions or put blocks upon certain things that should be said or should be not said. It really just depends on the views, the cultural views, and the religious views of the country itself, and that's okay. But it's at the same time, as a filmmaker myself, you would realize that censorship ends up limiting your self-expression. Freedom of expression is something that has driven films throughout centuries. There's been a lot of films that have always been controversial in some way, but I think those films have had the most impact in not only in film history, but also in our culture. So it's a tricky question, because you have to in the end embrace the country that you're making films in, and there are ways to put your message across that is not just in your face offensive, for example, but you can kind of craft it in a good story where it ends up becoming just a subtext that a lot of people pick up upon, but it's not what the film is really about. It's just ways that you have to find to move around the message you want to put across. You can always go back to, you can always make a few films elsewhere, and you could get around that. That's one of the best options. If you go to the US, there's no censorship there whatsoever, But eventually, it's something you have to embrace, because it's the country that you're living in. But there are ways around it. It's just how creative you can be and how important that issue is for you. So you can always get around the issue by always finding it to, there's a movie called District 9, for example. It's a science fiction film. It's a film about aliens. But the film really has a layer of commentary about racism in it. And like 90% of the audience wouldn't pick up upon that, because on the surface it's an alien invasion movie. But when you watch that film with that in, like if you watch it a couple of times, you pick up on that aspect of it, and that movie makes that point pretty well compared to a lot of other films which are straight up right up about racism. So I think it's just the way that you can portray that in a way that you're not really offending people, but you're still bringing a point across.
I would like to ask the next question. As an independent filmmaker in the UAE or anywhere in the world, one of the major motivations, as you already spoken, is to tell a story.
Sure.
But to really sustain yourself, like you made one movie and people liked it,
yeah.
and you want to make one more movie, for example, isn't really making money, somewhere in the mind of a filmmaker that somewhere down the line, I would actually earn money, and because of the web nowadays, I mean, what are the possibilities, and how can an independent filmmaker stay motivated? Not only to tell stories, but eventually ending up earning some money. Is there any possibility?
Sure. I mean, to be honest, if you're making short films, which is what a lot of filmmakers will do when they're starting off, you're making short films, whether they're student films or the films you're doing independently, you cannot expect to make money of those films. All the short films that I've done so far, I've only had 2 of them make any money, and that was only because I submitted to a competition which I won a cash prize in. So that's not what short films really are an on-the-ground film school. Because you end up only when you're making a film, there's a lot of things that you realize only when you're making a film right on the ground. There's mistakes that you'll make. You'll find out a lot about yourself. You'll find a lot about how you deal with other people, and you'll learn from your mistakes. So just the point that you're saying about, that you have that worry in your head that whether I can sustain myself. The way I handle that is the same idea that you have about telling a story, which is what made you filmmaker in the first place. You realize that especially in a country like UAE, where filmmakers are not as many as you would find probably in LA, you find a lot of opportunities for brands to want to work with you, for other companies to want to work with you, and they want you to tell their story. And they rely upon you to tell it in the way that you tell best. They like the way you tell a story. They just want you to tell it. So it's just you have an opportunity to be creative in telling someone else's story. And I think that in this region, if you have that skill to do that, you have a lot of demand, because digital advertising is a very rising and rapidly evolving industry in this region, and those skills that you have of storytelling directly affect that. A lot of people just want to move into branded content now. Advertising is becoming important, but a lot of people are learning the power of the web. So for example, a lot of people realize that if you just tell somebody to watch an ad of a Samsung phone, for example, maybe 10,000 people are going to end up watching it. But if you make a short film where Samsung is naturally, the product is naturally part of it, but it's a short film, it's a story, a lot more people will end up be willing to watch it. Nobody wants to just watch an ad. They might come across on TV, but nobody wants to click online and be like, oh, I'm going to watch an ad. So unless of course it has a big celebrity or someone in it. So the idea is how creative you become. And I've made a short film for Samsung, for example, the example I'm giving. I was approached by them to make a short film which has the Galaxy Note as one of the characters in the film. So I ended up making this kind of a cute college set comedy, which just happens to have Galaxy Note in it. And that was the first paid assignment that I ever got out of filmmaking. So it's just like how you use those skills and apply it to other more filmmaking ventures. When you're making feature films, that's when you really end up making money. And that's something that, of course, I'm writing a couple of projects, and it's not as easy as short films at all. It's a lot of work, and you need to make sure that you have a good film to make money on. But that opens up a lot of avenues where you can go for distribution, DVD distribution, home video, cinematic. That's when you can really sustain yourself becoming a filmmaker. But there's always things like advertising and branded content you need to keep in mind to sustain yourself. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Oh, sure.
Morning, sir. Actually, I just wanted to know what are the different social issues that you address in your movies generally, and what are the different challenges that you faced when you first started filmmaking? So.
Sure. I'll answer the second one first. It's one of the first challenges you'll face is you'll realize that UAE, as a country right now, as I said, filmmaking is not an industry here yet. So when you start making films and you write your story, and you'll find if you're looking for professional crew or professional actors, you'll have a hard time finding those, because there's not a lot of those in here, and the few that are here are really in demand, and they're shooting all kinds of different things. and they expect to be paid, of course. So that's budgets are one of the issues that you're gonna find. If you write something that requires that budget, then you're gonna find it hard to gather that money, unless it's your own money or like people you know, of course. So that's one issue that you're gonna face. For me, the way I tackled it is the way I make a lot of short films, even now, is I write based on the resources that I have. So if I have a house to shoot in, if I have an office to shoot in, if I have a swimming pool to shoot at, I will make sure that my story fits within those places, because then when you shoot a film, it just looks like an expensive film, or not an expensive film, but it doesn't look like a film you shot in the back of your house, because you've made your story adapt to that nature. So that's something you have to work with. You have to find ways around it. Resources is definitely a big issue and challenge in terms of here. The one film that I've made so far, which actually kind of tackles a social issue, it was interesting because it was something, it's the closest to a passion project that I ever had. And it was a largely dialogue-less film that I made. It's called Bubble. It's on YouTube if you guys want to check it out. And it tackles the theme of, you know, of how poverty can really make you desperate in certain ways, and how there's certain decisions that you wish you never had made, and how you kind of imagine certain times that how your life would have been if you wouldn't have made those decisions. So it tackles a lot of these kind of themes. There was, when you're doing themes like these, a little more, like they're not completely positive. They're not like, oh, it's anti-bullying. That's a completely positive thing. If you approach companies to shoot your film, and if you have that theme, you're going to have a better luck. You're like, oh, okay, this is completely positive. But you have something which is a little gray area, then you're going to have some resistance. Like I've approached a couple of companies with that script in mind, and some of them just got a little scared. They're like, okay, this is a movie, and we don't know how it's going to, because they have trust in you, but they're just looking at a blueprint. They haven't seen the full film yet. So they might have the resistance in the beginning where they'll be like, okay, no, sorry, we can't, you can't shoot here. So I got around that, and I made the film, and the film came out well. But yeah, you will face some resistance depending on how controversial or edgy or how gray your social issue topic is.
On behalf of the School of Media and Communication and the MCRAW Organizing Committee, I would like to thank all the chairpersons and faculty from all schools and the Facilities Department for their constant support through the event. A special mention to the School of Design and Architecture for providing us with creative pieces for the stage. And a big thank you to all our supporting partners, Yellow Egg Cafe, Palmer's, Rasasi, Quanta, Cool & Cool, Barakat Quality Plus, and Korean Printing Press.